"Don't go in yet." He said it quietly, his hand closing around my arm. Before I could climb even the first step of the arts building, and the look on his face stopped me cold. "You need to hear something before your daughter walks across that stage, and she cannot know you're listening." I stood there in my good navy blazer, the one I'd pressed twice that morning, and looked at this man who had known my husband for 32 years, who had delivered his eulogy, who had sat in that hospital corridor for 6 hours without once suggesting he had somewhere else to be. In all of that time, he had never once invented an emergency. "What's happened?" I said. He glanced around the courtyard. Families were streaming past us with armfuls of flowers, younger siblings in shoes that didn't fit right, a grandfather adjusting his hearing aid. Ordinary May morning, convocation day. "Not here, my office. We have maybe 35 minutes before the processional starts." I followed him through a side door I'd never noticed, up a back staircase, telling myself the whole way that I was being dramatic, that this was some administrative confusion, some departmental misunderstanding that had gotten blown out of proportion. My daughter had spent 5 years on this degree. She had missed Christmases, had eaten most of her meals at her lab bench, had called me exactly once in a panic, just once, and said through tears she was trying to hide, "I don't know if I can finish this, Mum," and I had told her she could. I had told her her father would have said the same, and she had. She'd done it. This morning was supposed to be her reward. I'd been awake since 4:30. I'd lain there in the dark and thought about my husband the way I still did every morning without meaning to, reaching across to a side of the bed that had been cold for 3 years. I thought about how he would have been up before me, would have made the coffee and sat at the kitchen table with her dissertation. He'd already read it twice before he died. The early draft she'd sent him the spring before his heart attack. And he would have read it a third time this morning just because he was the kind of man who wanted to be ready to talk about it. To really talk about it. Not just say congratulations, I'm proud of you, but to sit across from her and ask the questions that showed he understood what she'd built. I made the coffee myself, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the backyard come slowly into the May light, the lilac bush we'd planted the year our daughter started school finally big enough to reach the fence. I felt the specific heaviness of a good day happening without the right person in it. I pushed it away, put on the earrings from our 35th anniversary, drove to the Queen's University campus early enough to find parking near the front. I had not planned to spend 30 minutes of that morning climbing a back staircase with my heart hammering. His office was dim, the blinds half drawn. He closed the door, didn't sit, just picked up his phone and pressed play. I recognized the voice immediately. My daughter's supervisor, 47 years old, silver-haired, the kind of smooth professional manner that made him easy to like at faculty dinners. I had sat across from this man at a departmental reception 11 months ago, and he had told me, looking me directly in the eye, that my daughter was the most gifted doctoral student he'd supervised in 15 years. I had believed him. I had felt proud in a way that was almost physical, a warmth behind the sternum. He was speaking to someone I didn't recognize. His tone was almost bored. "The authorship order is being corrected before the paper goes to final submission. My name moves to first position. She contributed lab work. Significant lab work. I'll grant her that. And she gets co-author credit for that. It's fair." The other voice, "And the NSERC announcement?" "Goes under my lab's name, which is accurate. These are my facilities. This is my program." A pause. Then my daughter's supervisor again. "She won't fight it. She needs my reference letter for the Vancouver postdoc. She's not going to risk that relationship over authorship order. That's not how junior researchers think when they understand how the discipline works." The recording ended. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the convocation crowd gathering on the lawn below the window. Somewhere down there, my daughter was standing in her graduation gown, probably checking her phone one last time. Probably trying to slow her breathing the way she always had before anything important. "When did you get this?" I said. He sat down heavily. 2 days ago. His graduate research assistant came to me. She's a former student of mine. She'd been asked to prepare the authorship amendment documentation and wasn't comfortable with it. She didn't know what else to do. He folded his hands on the desk. "I wanted to be certain before I came to you, and I needed to know if anything could still be done this morning before the NSERC announcements goes public this afternoon. Once it's on the federal record under his name, contesting it becomes exponentially more difficult." "Does my daughter know any of this?" "No." I thought about that. Thought about my daughter, who had trusted this man through the hardest years of her adult life. Who had emailed me his comments on her proposal and said, "He sees exactly what I'm trying to do. He gets it." If I had called her 2 days ago, if I had said, "I've heard something, I need you to listen," she would have defended him. She would have told me I didn't understand how academia worked, which was true, and he would have known something had been said, and whatever thin window still existed, this morning would have already closed. "Is there someone else?" I said. "You said you needed to know if anything could be done. That means you have something." He nodded slowly. "There's a woman who finished her doctorate here 3 years ago. She left academia afterward. Her supervisor changed the authorship on her flagship paper too. Same pattern, different paper, same department. She was afraid to say anything at the time. She had a newborn, and she needed the degree cleared, and she needed it to be over." He paused. "She reached out to me last week. She's here today. She drove up from Toronto this morning. She brought everything. Original file copies, dated email chains, the submission receipt, with her name as first author, and the published version with her name third. She's willing to speak. She says she is. She says she should have spoken 3 years ago, and she's done being afraid." I looked at the window, at the May sky above the limestone buildings, the same limestone my husband had walked past for 40 years, the same campus where he'd spent his career believing the institution was worth something. "Take me to her," I said. She was waiting in a seminar room 2 floors down. Early 30s, slight, with the look of someone who has been rehearsing something frightening for a long time and has now arrived at the moment and is not entirely sure her legs will cooperate. She had a little boy with her. He couldn't have been more than 3, red-haired and cheerful, pushing a small toy truck along the baseboard, without any awareness that the adults around him were in the middle of something enormous. She'd brought him because she had no one else to leave him with that morning. She apologized for that. "Don't apologize for a second," I said. We sat at the seminar table and she spread out what she had. Printed email chains, draft chapters with tracked revisions in her name. A submission confirmation time-stamped 14 months before the published paper, with her listed as first author. And then the published paper itself, her name buried in the 3rd position. The gap between those 2 documents told the whole story without a single word of explanation needed. I looked at it all, thought about my husband, who had spent 4 decades in that building. Thought about my daughter, who had followed him into it, believing it deserved her. "You didn't say anything before," I said. "It wasn't an accusation. I just needed to understand." She kept her eyes on her son for a moment. He had found something interesting along the baseboard. I just had him. He was 8 weeks old. I needed the degree to clear because I had a job starting in 6 weeks and no backup plan. I needed the reference letter. I needed to just. She stopped. I needed it to be over, and I told myself it wasn't worth it. I told myself he was powerful and I was nobody, and that people would say I was bitter. She looked back at me. "I'm sorry. I think about it. If I'd said something then, maybe your daughter." "You were protecting your family," I said. "You made the choice you had to make. You're making a different one today. That matters." We had 20 minutes before the processional. I know what people would say afterward, and some of them said it. That I should have gone to the dean's office, laid the documents on a desk, let the institution handle it through proper channels. Maybe. But I had tried to make an appointment with the dean's office 48 hours before and been told the earliest availability was 6 weeks out. And I knew, the way you know things after 63 years, the way you learn to read a situation and understand what it actually is versus what it's presenting as, that once the NZERC announcement went out that afternoon with the wrong name attached, it would become a different kind of battle. One fought on ground he'd chosen, with paperwork already filed and funds already moving. My daughter was not going to lose 5 years of work to a man who had correctly calculated that she was too vulnerable to fight him. Not if I could prevent it. I found my seat in the 3rd row. The hall was full. Kingston families with their bouquets and their best clothes, an overflow crowd spilling into the side aisles. The May light through the tall windows was extraordinary, that particular Ontario gold that makes everything look both real and slightly suspended, like the moment right before you take a photograph. My daughter filed in with her cohort, and I found her immediately. I would have found her in any crowd. I had spent 31 years learning every particular of how she moved. She was scanning the room. When she found me, she smiled. A real smile, not the formal one she was saving for the stage, and I smiled back and pressed my hand once to my chest. A thing we'd done since she was small. I see you. I'm here. I know what I'm about to do to this morning, I thought. I'm sorry, my love. I'm so sorry. The ceremony moved through its opening. Land acknowledgement. Welcome from the provost. A donor recognition. Then the faculty processional, supervisors and committee members filing to their seats on the stage, and there he was, her supervisor. He settled into his chair with the particular ease of someone who has already decided how a day is going to end. Adjusted his academic hood, looked out at the crowd. The valedictorian spoke. A faculty member gave the research excellence address. They began calling names for the doctoral degrees, alphabetically, each person crossing the stage to applause, the dean shaking hands, hoods being placed, citations read. My hands were cold in my lap. When they called my daughter's name, I watched her stand. Watched her walk to the stage with that careful composure she'd had since childhood, the set of her shoulders that meant she was holding herself together by sheer intention. The dean shook her hand. The hood was placed. The citation was read aloud, and the citation named her supervisor's lab, described his intellectual contribution, framed 5 years of her work as a valuable addition to his research program. She stood at the podium for the photograph. She had done something genuinely important. I'd had it explained to me enough times, patiently, that I actually understood it now, what her drug delivery research meant, what it could make possible within the decade, for people with the kind of cancer that had taken my husband. She had built that. From the beginning. In his lab, yes, with his resources, but with her mind and her hands and her 5 years. And the man sitting on the stage behind her had decided very quietly that it was actually his. I stood up. The sound was louder than I expected. Chair, jacket fabric, the small shocked intake of breath from the woman beside me. Heads turned from all directions. I'm sorry to interrupt. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I need to say something before this ceremony continues. The dean looked up. The provost turned. On the stage, my daughter went completely still. Mum, barely audible, what are you doing? I love you, I said. I need you to know that before anything else. And I need everyone here to know that what I'm about to say comes entirely from that. I turned toward the stage, toward him. The research being credited to this man's intellectual leadership was conceived, designed, and carried out by my daughter. I have documentation showing that the authorship on her primary paper was amended without her knowledge after submission, amended to remove her from first position. The NZERC grant being announced this afternoon under his laboratory's name is funded by work she did. This is not the first time this has happened in this department. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the silence of several hundred people, deciding simultaneously what they were allowed to do with what they'd just heard. From 4 rows behind me, a voice I recognized, "My name is Lacey Drummond." She stood. Her son, startled by the change, scrambled to his feet beside her and gripped the hem of her blazer, looking around at the crowd with the fearless curiosity of a child who finds a room full of strangers interesting rather than threatening. "I completed my doctorate in this department 3 years ago," she said. Her voice shook, but she kept going. "My supervisor changed the authorship on my primary paper 14 months after I submitted it. I have the original submission records. I have the email chain. I have every draft with my revisions tracked and dated." She was holding a folder against her chest with both hands. "I didn't say anything at the time because I was afraid, and I had a newborn at home and I needed it to be over." She looked directly at the stage. "I should have said something then. I'm saying it now." Her son tugged at her sleeve. He had spotted someone he recognized on the stage. "Mummy," he said, at the full volume of a 3-year-old who doesn't know what an inside voice is for. "Is that the man who made you cry? The one you said wasn't fair?" The hall went absolutely silent. I watched her supervisor's face cycle through several things very quickly. I watched the dean rise slowly from his chair. What followed was not clean. The ceremony was suspended. University legal counsel call was called. Families filtered out into the lobby with their flowers and their confusion, whispering in clusters, the morning's clarity broken open into something none of them had prepared for. My daughter found me in the corridor. She stood there in her graduation hood, which had gone which had gone slightly crooked during all of it, and looked at me with the same expression she'd had at 8 years old when she was trying to understand something that didn't fit into what she thought she knew. "How long?" she said. 2 days. He came to me 2 days ago." I nodded toward where my husband's colleague was standing against the far wall, giving us space. "He waited until he had enough to be certain." "Why didn't you tell me then? Why today? Why like this, in front of everyone?" I held her gaze. "Because you would have defended him. You would have called it a misunderstanding. And you would have told him something had been said. Because you're honest and you can't help it. And the window would have closed." She looked at the floor, the crooked hood. "You're right," she said quietly. "I know you're right. I would have." A long pause. "God, I absolutely would have." I reached up and straightened her hood without asking permission. The way I'd straightened her school uniform for years. The way her father used to fix her collar before anything that mattered to her. "He would have done this himself," I said. "You know that." Her face did something that took a moment to settle. "Yeah," she said, her voice rough. "He would have stood up in the 2nd row and probably said it in a way that was funnier than yours." I laughed despite everything. She did too, a short broken sound, and then she was crying in earnest, which she almost never did, and I held her there in that corridor while her 5 years began the slow work of being given back to her. The Faculty of Science completed its investigation 11 weeks after convocation. The authorship amendment was reversed. The journal issued a correction. The NSERC grant, frozen pending review, was reassigned to her postdoctoral position in Vancouver. The lab had held the offer open for her, which told me something important about the people she was going to work with. Her supervisor resigned before the investigation concluded. I don't need to know the details. I know enough. I met my husband's old colleague for coffee last week, Tim Hortons, near the university, because he is 71 years old and unpretentious about such things. And I have decided I find this admirable. We sat there for nearly 2 hours. He told me stories about my husband that I hadn't heard, small ones, the kind that accumulate over 30 years of adjacent offices and shared coffee, and the long, ordinary duration of a real friendship. He made me laugh twice, which I hadn't expected. "He would have been glad you did it," he said. "He would have done it better," I said. "Oh, almost certainly," he agreed, without any hesitation at all, and somehow that was the most comforting thing he could have said. My daughter called last Tuesday from Vancouver. She sounds like herself again, like the version of herself that existed before the final heavy year, before whatever she'd been carrying, without knowing she was carrying it, settled fully onto her. The first thing she told me, unprompted, "Mom, I'm actually sleeping." We talked for nearly 2 hours. At the end, she said, "I keep thinking about what you told me in that corridor, that Dad would have done it himself." "Yes," I said. "I think you're more like him than you realize." I held the phone for a long moment after we said goodbye. In the front hallway, there's a photograph of my husband, caught laughing at something off camera, completely unguarded, the way he looked when something genuinely delighted him. I pass it every day. I looked at it then. We kept her safe, I thought. We did all right. There are things grief doesn't ease. The house still holds a certain silence, the reflex of turning to tell someone something and remembering. The particular ache of a good day happening to people you love while you're the only one there to witness it. But here is what I know, at 63, after everything these years have held. Love is not a feeling you wait to act on. It is a decision you make, over and over, in the moments when it actually costs you something. I stood up in that hall because my daughter had spent 5 years building something real, and a man had looked at what she'd built and decided her need for his approval was worth more to him than her name. I was wrong to stay silent for 2 years before that morning. I ignored what my instincts were telling me because I told myself I didn't understand his world, that I was just a worried mother reading too much into things. Don't make that mistake. When something sits wrong in your chest, when the story doesn't quite add up and the person explaining it is counting on your willingness to defer, that feeling is not paranoia. That feeling is information. My daughter is in Vancouver, sleeping through the night, working on something that will bear her name. Her supervisor's name will not appear on it, and every morning she sends me a brief text. Nothing elaborate, just a line or two, the way she's done since her first week at university. And every morning I read it with the particular gratitude of someone who knows how close things came to being different. That is what I protected. That is what was worth standing up for. I would do it again without hesitation, and I would stand up sooner.